was out golfing, but I was not going to join. I don't golf anyway, but
Yeah. Oh,
um,
it's unseasonal then.
yeah, it's very
Yeah.
unseasonal. It's really cold.
Yeah.
I get, yeah, yesterday though it was in the 70s, and today was in the 70s. It's going to be in the 70s, it looks like.
That's nice.
But yeah, how about you guys?
It's supposed to be really warm this week. So we
Oh,
should have
okay.
temperatures in the 80s. That will be really,
Oh, wow.
that'll be super warm for us
That's
here
warm. Yeah, that
in
is.
Pacific Northwest at
Yeah,
this time of year anyway.
yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to see you today. And thanks
Oh,
for
you
joining me
too.
for this. We
Yeah,
might have Carrie Bartholomew join us in a little while. I don't know if she'll make it in, but if she does, we'll welcome her to join us.
sounds good.
And yeah, I'm glad to talk with you. We had
Yeah.
I guess for I've had quite a few new people join the or subscribe to this channel recently. So would you want to give a little introduction of yourself for anybody who may
Sure.
not have already met you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Christine Sefein Wolk. I just recently got married, so I'm still trying to remember my new last name. But anyhow, it's good to be with everybody. So I'm a former professor at Antioch University and at the Los Angeles campus. So Leslie, you and I met, as mostly everybody knows, through that because you were a student at the campus up there in Washington, and I was a professor at the campus in LA. So we didn't run into each other when we were both with the schools, but after the fact. So I left, and I left in sort of a public way, and ended up making a video about why I was leaving, and joined an organization called FAIR at the time, to kind of make my big breakout. The ideology that was being pumped through the school and through our curriculum was something I didn't align with. And when I wanted to speak up and say something about that, essentially I was told this is the model that we're going to be using. So there was no way that I was able to, on my own, continue to create content and curriculum for my own classes. I was teaching graduate students. And I had also been through the program myself 10 years prior. So it was a really big change that happened along the way. And it was something that I was no longer willing to do. And so I left and have since been kind of volunteering with a lot of different organizations that are trying to shed some light on this issue. And one of them is Critical Therapy Antidote, which is a network of therapists worldwide that are coming together and finding ways to shut down this ideology and return back to what some of the original healing principles of psychotherapy are really about. So I've worked with them for some time now too.
Mhm.
And but this has really been my favorite, is to have conversations like this where we're able to just dialogue, because that's something that's been missing, is actual dialogue where we can
Mhm.
actually hear each other and talk about these things. All of that dialogue has been shut off if it's in some way threatens the narrative that is being put out there. And so that's been a really big challenge, I think, for me, is sort of finding places where we can actually do that and make some sort of change, or somehow point out why this ideology is so harmful.
Mhm. Yeah, I when I think that dialogue piece is really important. And I was speaking with someone just this last week, and I'm going to put the video up this week.
Mm-hmm.
An academic named Jamie Roberts in Australia, and one of the things that he was talking about is how people are very good at picking up taboos, even if they're not explicitly stated. People are really good at seeing where the no-go zones are
Mm-hmm.
in their world around them. So people who, we often say, like, I knew I shouldn't talk about this, but I don't know exactly how. You try to ask people, how were you informed that this was an off limits topic? And it's kind of hard to explain that. And so there were many of those when I was in
Yes.
graduate school. I felt like there were a lot of areas of conversation. Like I mentioned this in the conversation I had with Amy Gallagher recently, that there was this psychologist who was getting really popular when I was in graduate school. You may have heard of him. His name is Jordan Peterson. So yeah, he was so popular in the pop culture. You were hearing about him constantly. I liked some of his ideas quite a bit. And I was in graduate school in an applied psychology program, and I just knew that I couldn't have mentioned his name. I knew I couldn't.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because anybody told me I couldn't. It's just, I knew it would be off limits. And so there's that quelling of dialogue that you're talking about.
Yes. Yes. That's so interesting. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if you had brought up his name. I'd be curious to see what the response would have been in your class.
Yeah.
Major
I wonder
meltdowns,
too.
But
yeah, I wonder too. But it is interesting. And I do think that we have, we certainly have silenced people.
Yes.
There's a lot of self-censorship.
Yes, it's very much so. And that was one thing for me as a professor, that I never felt as though I had to censor myself before. I was always very much able to just, if you were taking my class, and I was kind of known as that. People knew if Christine's teaching, Christine's the one that's going to tell you how it is. Christine's the one who's going to give you a real good insight into what happens once you get out of the protective bubble of school and you're out there practicing. I mean, I was just known for that. So when that was taken from me, that's, I mean, a huge part of my identity as a professor was somebody that was always going to be really, really honest about how things were, and have honest dialogue, even when I disagreed. So, that was, I think, the roughest part was the silencing that happened. And that's where I knew I couldn't continue to teach anymore, at least not under that context.
Hi, Carrie. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
So, that one of the areas when I was studying counseling that I found I had a lot of dissonance around was sexual health, this human sexuality discussion. It was really strange to me how we were talking about it. The culture, I don't know when we shifted to a completely consent-based, pleasure-based sexual morality, but we did. And I don't remember a lot of cultural messaging around what was okay and what wasn't okay sexually until recently, when we get a lot of cultural messaging around everything is okay.
Yes.
And so it used to be sort of a private thing that was values-based and something that perhaps would have been transmitted through family or through discussions with your really with your family and with friends, and now there's this big, it feels like a big PR campaign everywhere to say that everything is okay. And so when I was studying human sexuality, I've told this story before, and maybe with you guys, but we had this one example that really stood out to me. Was my teacher told us, she's a counselor, and she told us that you're going to confront certain issues in your clients that are going to be surprising to you. And you have to be able to, her message was, you have to be able to hold a straight face, which I thought was interesting. It's kind of condescending in a really major way. It wasn't about health of the other person. It was about, don't laugh at them. And she gave an example of a client of hers that told her that he does scat porn, which is a phrase I had never heard before, but I can figure out what that means. And it wasn't explicitly laid out for me either. I don't want to explicitly lay it out for anybody else, but that was a phrase that she used. She says, this client does this, he does scat porn. And her impulse was to laugh. And as therapists, we have to not laugh and be accepting of our clients and whatever they are doing. And my thought was, what does this mean for this person, that he's choosing to exploit his most personal body functions,
right,
for money, for other people's erotic pleasure? That's really, there's a lot going on there. And I would have liked for us to be able to talk about what all is going on there for that person. And they talk about paraphilias and then paraphilic disorder. Paraphilic disorder is like, it's all fine as long as it's not making you feel bad. If it starts to make you feel bad or interfere with your function in life, then we might have a problem. But if it's not, then anything is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the questions that I had, this goes back to what you were saying about dialogue and just being able to talk openly. And I wish I had asked this, but I felt like I couldn't ask it. I still kind of struggle with asking it. It's, in therapy, when you're seeing a mental health counselor, you're seeing someone who is secular and not trying to impose their values on you.
Mm-hmm.
But is there some kind of a value system? Is there any backdrop? What is the moral and ethical backdrop for deciding if someone's behavior is healthy? And we see a lot of affirmation right now, which is like all of these affirming therapists, which says there is something that they're saying is good. So they're positing a good, moral, virtuous, values-based something. But there's not what's the other end? When are you able to say, let's evaluate this? How do you feel about that? That sounds like maybe, what, and where does the values-based exploration come from? So that was something that I felt like I couldn't even bring up.
Yeah.
So I wish I could share with you, but because I'm in my car, I can't. I'm not actually in outer space, but 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 I just saw something recently talking about the new world religion. I'll put it in the comments. But part of that new religion is that there is nothing actually wrong. It is queering society to the point that there is literally nothing wrong. And I'm watching that happen right now. In Utah, there's a lot of stuff going on with, especially with the new Title IX stuff, right? So the new Title IX is pushing gender, and you can use the bathroom of your choice, et cetera, et cetera. And the kids are supposed to not react to it. So that's what I saw when I first came on. I hope this is the right subject, but that's what I saw when I first came on, is that they're being taught to not react. They're literally being taught to swallow the lie until they get to the point where it doesn't taste bad anymore. And I think that we're all being taught that. We're all being taught that, oh my goodness. I just got out of another interview, and we're being taught that this is the way to be kind when we're actually causing harm, because we're feeding into more and more people's delusion.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I was sort of mentioning earlier. Is my sound a little bit better?
Yeah, it's louder now. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Something that I was kind of mentioning earlier is it's interesting to me because, in therapy, in traditional therapy programs, well, I'm an MFT, marriage and family therapist, right? We have family therapy classes in school and we teach them. And one of the big components of any kind of family therapy is that there has to be structure in a hierarchical type setting in the home in order for the family to function. And what actually I think throws me, I don't know how it's possible to even say that this works, is when you have polygamous families that are trying to raise children, because the entire structure and the hierarchical nature of a family gets very blurred, and the lines are blurred in those kinds of families where anything goes. So now anything goes. Who are the adults? Who are the children? Which adults make the decisions? And, do the children, which adults are the children supposed to be listening to? I mean, there's a lot of confusion in those kinds of complex structures that actually don't have structure to them at all, which is what makes them very difficult and convoluted. So to me, this is where I've found a very big kind of conflict between what a family unit structure is supposed to be, or what we know functions well as a family structure, and then these all of these other lack of structure kinds of scenarios that are considered to be okay and that are welcomed and valued. I mean, there are TV shows about this stuff that we watched. There's stuff that's normalizing, right? All of those things, those TV shows normalize this kind of behavior. They normalize having 4 or 5 or 6 different adults all in some polyamorous relationship together, raising each other's kids together, where there's, no prominent necessarily, glue that's holding this all into something that is understandable for children and not confusing. So that's just kind of maybe a little bit off topic from what you were talking about, Carrie, but it was literally just what was on my mind as you were coming on and we were talking about anything goes. That was my initial kind of place to go, was that's where I find a really big problem with anything goes when it comes to family life.
That's an interesting one because it depends on the polygamist.
Yes.
Because the new polyamory kind of queerness that you might gather in a university is very different than the polygamy in their kind of colonies, where they do have a lot of order because they believe that they are allegiant to God. They believe they're following God, and so he has the most order, and then the man, and then I really don't understand all of the things, but that's very different.
But that's a good point.
Than a queer polygamous family in Seattle.
Yes, which is what I'm talking about. I don't know enough about the polygamy culture outside, so thank you for sharing that. But yeah, I think that's more of what I'm talking about, the kind of queer polygamous family over here in Seattle, LA, I can even say. I mean, it's not we're not going to just dump Washington under the bus, but it's that's but that's a really interesting delineation to make between the two different kinds. But yes, I think you kind of understood the direction I was going. But
and then the other thing is that yes, we are aiming this anything goes is about going lower and lower and removing the age of consent. I was listening to one person who said that his child made him ask, is it okay to, the child had to get consent for his father to give him a hug goodnight. Or the child wanted consent from the father to give him a hug goodnight because that's what he was taught at school. You need to ask my consent. And that makes the child autonomous. And then if the child is autonomous, they don't have that connection to family, which is ultimately what this comes down to. Everything comes down to, because I believe it was Antonio Gramsci who really started with sexualizing children, like 1984 style. And so, no, Brave New World, not 1984, but Brave New World, right? At the beginning, the child gets in trouble because he doesn't want to play sexually with the other children. And that's where we head when we adopt the idea of the myth of innocence. So, which I've heard people talking, I've heard counselors talking about, well, if you even believe in innocence.
Wow.
And speaking of counselors, I think this all ties really well into something that I wanted to share with you guys. I received a link from a friend who is a licensed therapist, and it was to a therapy website. I don't want to share this in order to call out anybody specific. I really don't want to. There's lots of different people practicing in this way. I could come up with hundreds of these examples.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to target any one particular person. So you're going to see a URL on this website. I'm going to try to avoid showing the person's name and face, but you're going to see URLs and stuff. So this isn't in an attempt to call out specific people, because this is how these people are being trained. This is to talk about what therapy training is looking like, and some very real, not fringe examples of what's going on in this profession. So I want to share this real quick with you guys. All right, you guys seeing my screen now?
Yeah.
So this is what what I was sent, and this, again, it's not to call out this particular practice, but this is a LGBTQ and neuro-affirming, sex positive, and kink-aware therapy service. And so when you go to their services, you can get to, I think it was this one. There's a lot here, but look at sexual health. What do you see? I didn't know
Sex
what
toys.
those were. I had to be told what those were. Sorry. I guess
those are
I'm
You didn't know what
Are
sex toys are?
They're sex
I'm
toys.
sorry.
Is that
I mean,
right?
I've heard of sex toys, but this isn't something that is a part of my repertoire. So I didn't know what I
Yeah.
was looking at.
Anal beads? I'm guessing.
Oh, I don't know. But
You guys know I'm running for office, right?
yeah. Okay, but look at this.
Okay.
I think this is a good time to share that I'm pro kink, pro ho, and pro sex work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Basically, I'm pro anything safe for sex that you affirmatively consent to. Just thought you should know. And so my main goal is to champion your pursuit of pleasure in whatever way that looks for you. So this sounds like, well, first of all, it's not good English, my way, in whatever way that looks like for you.
Right.
But this sounds a lot like the way that I was taught.
Yes.
This sounds like the education that I received. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder. And so I went to another website. This was somewhere far away from me in another state. So I went to go look up what is Kink-aware, because I think that's a word she used, Kink-allied or Kink-aware here.
Yes.
In this Kink-aware. So I
Yes.
put in Kink-aware therapy Seattle. And Psychology Today has a list of people who are kink-aware. And so this person specializes in internalized bi/homophobia, non-monogamy, BDSM, and kink. Is a therapist specializing in BDSM and kink.
And this is why we need to be careful about quote unquote trusting experts.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. And this was not
sex positive kink allied. Kink allied. So what does kink allied even mean? You can find so many of these people who do this. This one is affirming of kink polyamory, queer polyamory, and kink identity. So there's a kink identity now. You can identify as kink. And it just keeps going. This is just people in Seattle. Well, does that surprise anybody really?
How many, it does make me wonder how many people authentically do want to practice in this fashion and how many people are just starting to throw those words up on their profile because that's the trend now and they're sort of following what the trends are. Because I wonder about that. I wonder if that's a way to also kind of get clients, and it's especially Psychology Today is extremely competitive. But
well, here's this was when I looked up Kink-aware, what does it mean to be a Kink-aware therapist? I found this. It's a national coalition for sexual freedom, Kink-aware professionals, sex positive support for kink and non-monogamy.
Yeah, this was starting when I was teaching. One of my colleagues had introduced me to this actually, and I remember specifically saying, I'm not going to teach this in class. I was actually asked to teach a human sexuality class, but when I looked at the curriculum and saw the kinds of things I would need to teach and that I would have to be positive, affirming of, I actually said, no, I'm not going to teach the class. So this has been bubbling up here for the past, I would say 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
If I think about when I was first asked to do it, it was about 6 or 7 years ago.
Wow.
It really seems like it's about making people as base as possible. Not based with the ED at the end, but base, just like almost animalistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
And it's such a different,
let's see.
It's so different. I'm thinking about when I was a student and we would talk about this, even adults in the sex industry, even when I was a student, we would talk about these things. There was some psychology behind what might attract a person to do that. And how do you help a person discover, their own kind of self-esteem and expression in other ways that don't overly sexualize them. This is a complete reversal of that. Like a complete reversal of everything that I was taught when I was coming up in school. And then what started to happen when I became a professor, but now is very much a part of kind of the meat and potatoes of these programs now. It's all of this, at least with human sexuality where that's concerned. And that was not the case 10, 15, 20 years ago when we were looking at why people might be attracted to this stuff and what might be the underlying reason and how can we help them lead a more healthy, sort of,
Right.
This is this is on why it's important. Like says why is it important that we talk about alternatives to monogamy now? This is for psychology professionals. This is designed to help professionals. How can therapists prepare to work with people who are exploring polyamory? And so this kind of comes back to that question, like we're supposed to avoid having some kind of moral, we're supposed to not transmit our values and our morals to clients. We're supposed to support them in their own morals and values, except when it comes to pushing progressive morals and values. Then we're supposed to push them. So, to me, all of this, and we could keep exploring this if we want to, this kink and poly, whatever stuff that they're pushing. But oh gosh, I do want to look at this real quick. Kink clinical practice guidelines. What is this?
Well, what about that?
Go ahead, Carrie.
What about that one video that we saw with Planned Parenthood? And the person who does all of that stuff, she's obviously kind of the definition of kink. She's very stereotypically queer in a middle school talking to kids.
But see, here's the bigger issue I think I have with all of this and with the kids is that all of this kink and fantasies and pleasure and all of that, part of what it means to mature and to grow is that you can't always live by the pleasure principle that is the core of what runs your life, right? We have to have some acceptance of boundaries, acceptance of the word no, and that not everything is there for your pleasure. That is a very young child mentality. That is not what a mature-minded adult is supposed to be doing. There's supposed to be limits and, one could argue that part of the problem is that all we are is a bunch of overgrown children now that are trying to run the show. And this is why they're right. I mean,
well, also under people who are reduced to their base level, they can't stand for themselves.
Right.
They are deemed they are made incapable, right? They're made incompetent. And so again, going back to Gramsci, going back to things that have been done in the past, sexualizing people, making them as kind of like savage as possible.
Yes.
Makes it hard for them to stand up and advocate for themselves in positive ways.
That's very true. And this is very disturbing what you have up here, Leslie, about.
Yeah, isn't it?
This
says kink clinicians understand that kink interests may be recognized at any age.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
No, they're talking about people who report awareness before age of 10. Sample. No, they're probably this doesn't. I will just to be fair, it doesn't sound like they are talking to kids. It sounds like they're surveying people about when they became aware of their fantasies or whatever. But they're saying here, the sample reported having the first thoughts of or fantasies about BDSM at age 10 or earlier. And
but
so this is all making a case.
If they haven't been sexually abused themselves.
Well, they go into that also. They talk about that, but I don't know that all of that would always come from abuse. I mean, I'm sure people have lots of entry points into curiosity about lots of things. But so, and I want to go back up to this table of contents because I thought this was interesting. Oh, here it is. Sorry for your eyes if you're watching me scroll. But this sentence here, clinicians support social change to reduce stigma regarding kink. And this comes back to my my central point about this is that it's not per se to pick on people who have kink or whatever that means to someone. I mean, what does that even mean? I guess we could get into that and try to define what it means. Individuals in their private lives do lots of things that other people would look at and clutch their pearls or make judgments about. People do all kinds of things. People run their lives differently. People have different interests. It's this promotion that is really troubling to me. It's this like, we're going to act like we're morally neutral and we just want to promote you in thinking through your own morals and ethics, but we're going to really push certain things. And so there's this deep hypocrisy in this whole thing. I don't know what this is, the poly booklet that they've got up on that same Kink-aware therapy or professional website. But something I looked up as I was looking at this, I keep coming back to this question: how are we defining sexual morality? What does sexual morality mean in our culture right now? Because we certainly seem to be pushing some really progressive stuff. Like when you think about, was it when Obama was running for election in, what would that have been? 08?
08?
Yeah.
They had, was he even for legalizing same-sex marriage, or was it just civil unions at that point? I mean, this was that recently. There was questions in mainstream left-wing politics about something like that, and to see us go and from that point to, we have kink representatives standing by to affirm your children in BDSM, to go, it's like we went from one kind of, with a culture where the idea was, we don't ask about what's going on in your bedroom.
Right.
And we have to push to recognize people who want to have marriages, which is two people coming together in love to build a life together.
Yes.
Whether they're gay or straight, we want to work to recognize that that's okay culturally.
Yes.
But that seems so prudish now compared to what we're seeing everywhere.
Yes.
And it's not that we're finding that therapists can accept and work with clients that have these kinds of interests in their lives. It's that therapists are being social change agents. And that, so I thought, well, I'm interested in so I did a search on morality and therapy. One of the first hits was this BetterHelp thing.
Yeah.
And they want to talk about, they're trying to create this difference here. Continue reading to explore the differences and similarities between ethics and morality and how these concepts may impact therapy. And so they come here and they talk about the term ethics originates from the Greek word ethos, which means character or nature, while morality comes from the Latin word mores, which refers to customs, manners, and morals. And they basically break it down. So ethics is this like rules-based, legalistic thing, and morals is this deeply personal thing. Well, you can go to the etymology and find out that the word morals comes from a Latin translation of the word for ethics. They are the same thing. So you go to ethics. Ethics is the science of morals. It's the study of morals. It comes from the word. These are interchangeable words. And so we have this culture where therapy will promote ethics, but they want to stay out of morals. And so ethics comes down to things like, for them, consent. Like, do you have, what do they call it? Enthusiastic consent. And that makes something okay. But it's certainly this promotional thing that's happening.
Yes.
So I'm very curious, what are your thoughts about that, Christine, as someone who taught therapy? What were your thoughts about it at the time? What did you think about the line between supporting someone in their value system and offering some kind of moral guidance?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that, something that I used to say is, there are very few things that I think are black and white, but the things that are black and white are permanent fixtures. So not having sex with a client, for example, that's a permanent fixture, that's a black and white. But that most of the time, things that come up into the therapy room kind of live in the gray. And that's where a lot of things are, where people do live is in the gray a lot. And rigidity sometimes is where people find that they have the most struggle, or what they have difficulty with when they come into therapy. Is there's a lot of rigid thinking that can sometimes eat at a person. So you have to be able to sort of flow with and roll with the rigidity. But when it comes to the black and the white, you need to be wise enough to understand that those goalposts give some sort of structure and some sort of containment, boundaried life and meaning to a person that we all have to kind of have. So that was the way that I talked about it, is knowing what those kind of goalposts are and learning to live in the gray within that, but knowing that no matter what, there's certain things that are never going to be gray. They just are black and white. It is just not okay to do something. It is not okay to do this. It is okay to do that, whatever the case may be. Most of the time, it's what you can't do. And I think that's kind of how I tried to talk about it. But my main concern was more so that people didn't, let me give you this example, okay? Maybe this will help it become more clear as to how I used to think about these things. So I used to teach a lot of grief work, or a lot of grief courses. I worked in grief for a long time. That was kind of my specialty for a while. Well, in kind of the Western way of thinking about grief, let's say, a child's father dies, and the father is, the breadwinner, and maybe he's, the most, the mom maybe doesn't work. Maybe the father was the breadwinner, and he was the one that, made sure the family was taken care of. So we tell the kids, let's say 16, 17-year-old child will say to them, now you're the man of the house now that your dad died, for example. And so you got to rise up to the plate, step up to the plate and take over. And we would say, no, that 16 or 17-year-old needs to be able to grieve too. And they're still not an adult, so they shouldn't have those responsibilities. So that's a very Western way of thinking. Now you have, let's say, a Latino family who comes in and the same thing happens. And let's say they don't speak English. And let's say for that 16 or 17-year-old, it's actually a show of respect and a show of pride in the family to step up and to take care of the family and to work to bring in, money, and to work to help out and to help take care of the younger kids. So you're telling that person, that 16, 17-year-old, that way of thinking isn't healthy. That's not a healthy way to grieve. The healthy way to grieve is that you get to be a child and you get to be 16 or 17, and the adults around you have to be the ones to take care of you. Well, that's not always going to be the case in certain cultures. I can even speak from my own culture that in some ways that is sort of a badge of honor to be able to say, I'm going to step up here and I'm going to do what I can to help my family. So in thinking about what your morals or values are, that's where you have to be very aware of what is coming from a westernized way of looking at the world, or a very idealistic way of looking at the world, that ideally that would be the case, and looking at it from what the reality is and what might be ideal for somebody else. And those are kind of the ways that I would describe the differences, so that it was more about, understanding what a person's culture is and what their particular value set, what they're coming into the room with, what those values are, what their history is. I didn't touch topics like polygamy and, kink, culture and queer culture. I was mostly talking about things like grieving, things like I said, how do you pick up a household and continue to march forward when some major change happens and there's a major loss? Even if there's a divorce, okay, even if there's something that isn't death, what does that look like and what does that mean? So that's the way that I used to talk about these things.
What's interesting, Christine, is you're saying that, and there's all this work to make people culturally competent. That means respecting other cultures, etc. But most of the cultures that, if you are seeing like a diverse population in your therapy practice, most of the cultures that are not Western are probably going to be more, or not, I guess I should say not American or Euro-American, are going to be more conservative than the culture.
Right.
And so, but it seems, so it's like a Trojan horse to get you to open up towards all cultural whatever. And so this leftist culture, this, and I mean, I say this as somebody who's always considered myself liberal, and I still fall to the left of the center. But so this progressive leftist culture is the culture that we're mostly supposed to be softening up to. This is the
Yes.
culture that we're all supposed to be respecting.
Yes.
And that leaves us being sensitive to things that are far
Yes.
to the progressive end.
Yes.
Mm.
We hear a lot of language called where people will say we want to fundamentally transform
Yes.
our society. We want to
But the
fundamentally
problem,
transform our students,
that's
right?
the problem, is the pendulum that's swinging to this extreme level. And this is why I never bought into the cultural competent. I don't believe I can be culturally competent in any, including my own, by the way, because I have to say that within my own culture, there are very different, shades of belief systems and whatnot. And I never bought into that. But my main point was that we have to be open, and we have to be able to listen and understand that there's going to be people that are outside of our culture that are going to come to us. But this extreme, meaning accepting everything, again, that goes past my black and white goalposts. That's no longer in the gray for me. Now I've hit the black and the white goalposts on both ends, where we're no longer talking about, somebody's culture that, accepts that a boy goes out and starts working at the age of 17. Now we're talking about things that are actually psychologically damaging potentially for that child or for that home. That's where
And
those,
physically damaging.
what was that?
Physically damaging.
And physically damaging as well. That's where we're kind of hitting those posts. So it's sort of like, the extremeness of that left side, that left, progressive way of thinking and being in the world is just as bad as the extreme right. And that actually might be worse. I mean, maybe I shouldn't compare, but it might be even a little bit worse, but it's just as bad, at least.
Yeah. Oh, in the chat, somebody says, still sticking on left of center. That's cute. I think that's meant to be a bit of a condescending remark, but I'm just saying, I recently wanted to check my views on this and did another political compass test.
yeah.
And I always fall a little bit to the left. I do. I fall very close to the center on everything. I'm very close to the center up from on the x-axis and the y-axis. So yeah, sorry. It's not an identity. It's just a statement of fact. My political views do tend to fall
Sure.
slightly to the left. So
I think I fall slightly to the right on certain things and slightly to the left on others. And I think that's just kind of how but there are things that I fall slightly to the right of that I'm shocked that I do. I never thought I did before. And it took a lot of, I don't know if it's been this groundswell of insanity that has actually pushed me a little bit more in that direction. But there are still things I fall slightly to the left of as well. But I would say I fall to both sides on different topics. And I have to be really honest about that too. That there are things that I take a more conservative viewpoint on and things that I take maybe a more liberal viewpoint on. And I never thought I would say that about myself. I always thought I was a classic liberal on kind of all fronts, no matter what the issue is. And that's not the case anymore.
Well, yeah. when you are so far in one direction that everybody in the center looks like they're far, then you're pretty much off the cliff.
Right, right.
Well, that's the thing I think that's really important, is that anything can be taken too far.
Absolutely.
And it's really the extremes that are the problem.
Absolutely. Because I think that some of the ideas of being open-minded and these ideas of understanding other values and cultures and ethics and what their moral values are, I think that's important. But when we've said anything goes now and we have no guardrail, that's when I think we've jumped into this oblivion, and that's where we are now. And that's where we have absolutely no, I'm just going to be really personal about this and say that I don't have children, but if I was going to start a family now, considering the way the world is out at large, I would have a hard time making a decision to do that. And it's not because I didn't want children or that I don't want children. But this right now is a very dangerous time, in my opinion, culturally, to be able to raise kids that I haven't had yet. So I've made that decision with my partner that that's not something we're going to do, but I would have loved to have done that. But for me, we are already passed over that cliff. I don't know how far the drop is. That's the problem. And have we hit that bottom yet? And Carrie, you're talking about hitting a base. I don't think we've hit that base yet.
No, I think that base that basically, I think it looks like literally tearing each other apart. Some of the things that we're watching when we're watching people who aren't allowed into their schools because they're the wrong race, right?
Oh,
I mean, there's so much
yeah.
stuff that we're watching that
Yeah.
it's like, how did we get here? I just keep asking, how in the world? And I know, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, I've done the work to know how we got here, but I didn't think that it wouldn't be a big deal to some people. I
Yes.
didn't think that there would be justification. If there's justification for this, then what's next?
Right.
And
Right.
at what point does somebody say Herbert Marcuse's you know, violence is justified if it's towards the people that you're against?
Right.
What point do we watch that happen? And I think that's where we get extremely base. I really don't want to be, I want to say Animal Farm, but it's not that. It's the one with the kids stuck on the island and they eat piggy.
Oh,
You
Lord of the
Lord of the
Flies.
Lord of the
Flies.
Flies.
Yes.
I'm like, how
Yes.
bad are we gonna get?
Yes. Yes.
Well, when I hear people say that they decide not to have kids, or somebody in the chat says bringing children in right now is child abuse, that in a way that kind of makes me sad, because it feels
It
like
is sad.
part of what's we have kind of a global death cult right now. I know that sounds really dramatic, but we have people who are in power who are explicitly talking about reducing population.
Yes.
And we have this push for, I wonder how long it's going to be before we have that maids here in the United States. I don't think it's going to be that long. We're probably going to have that soon. These death pods, this, children being sterilized through choice or through medical action. And you see fertility rates just dropping everywhere.
They're plummeting.
And so part of me thinks that the way out is for good people to have and raise good people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's a very good point. And I think it's not wasn't an easy decision, and some other components kind of play into it, but that's a really good point as well. I mean, I have to say, but it's tough. It's tough.
You guys want to see the Planned Parenthood thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. It's pretty nutso. All right.
And I used to donate to Planned Parenthood. I was a very vehement supporter of Planned Parenthood. I am not any longer. I guess that's where you can say maybe I'm on the right on that one, I guess. A little bit to the right. I don't know.
Are you guys seeing this YouTube screen right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It's the Planned Parenthood playlist.
Yeah.
Called it's called All About Virginity and Your First Time. So what age group would you say that this is probably geared for? Oops.
That's a very colorful classroom. That's what I'm saying. So that's not.
I'm going to pop this off and then pop it back on because I need to make sure I can share audio.
Okay.
I need to do that one more time. Share sound.
Definitely elementary school is what it looked like in the back.
Yeah. Elementary, maybe middle school. If you're being
generous.
Generous.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen this virginity one. I have seen this one. You want to watch? Let's see what this one is. Can you guys hear it?
Virginity.
Okay.
What is it? And what's the big deal about losing it? Let me cut to the chase. Virginity is a completely made-up concept. It's a term that was created simply to control and shame people, mainly women. A virgin is someone who's never had sex, but it's not as simple as it seems. For one thing, medically, virginity isn't a real thing. In some cultures, people place a lot of importance on the hymen, a thin, fleshy tissue located at the opening of your vagina, as a marker of virginity. But the status of your hymen doesn't actually mean anything. That's because having penis and vagina sex is not the only way a hymen can stretch open. It can happen by putting something in your vagina like a tampon or a finger, riding a bike, or doing sports. So you can't tell if someone's had sex by the way their hymen looks or feels. Another reason the idea of virginity is complete nonsense is that sex means different things to different people. Generally speaking, society tends to define sex in a very narrow way: penetration, penis into vagina. But where does that definition leave queer people, or folks who can't or don't have penis and vagina sex, and choose to have oral, anal, or another type of sex instead? And not everyone's first sexual experience is consensual, meaning that they were forced or pressured into having sex. There is also a double standard on who carries the burden of virginity. Society puts pressure on men for not having sex at the exact same time they shame women for having it. Make it make sense. Either way, shame has no place in someone's personal decisions about sex. It's time to throw away the notion of losing.
Okay, I'm gonna, that's all I can handle of that one.
So
And
it's so mocking.
It's very
We're
snarky.
hearing- it's snarky, but it's very mocking. We're hearing all of this stuff about everything has to be for all. We had well, not we, but Michael Knowles came to Utah and he did a No Child is Born in the Wrong Body. Regardless of how you feel about it, it was a week after or it was a week after Pride Week. And the dean of the school, of the university, made it Pride Fortnight to make sure that, quote unquote, all students felt welcome. All. We have to understand that when they mean all, they mean some.
Yeah.
And mocking is completely acceptable. But I just watched you watch the Evergreen. I just watched that thing that you and Ben did the other day.
Yeah.
And that is the thing. They will take anything. And what I mean by they, I mean activists. They will take absolutely anything and say, that was offensive that you did that. I can't believe you did that. You should resign. You should be fired. Whatever. But they can make a video like this that is so mocking of people's values.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
Which one do you guys want to try next?
Gross. It gives me some nightmares, man. This is
What
not.
happens the first time you have sex?
You want to do how do I know if I'm ready, or what happens the first time?
Oh, probably what happens the first time, but
Okay,
Yeah.
let's find out.
Ew.
Let's find
So
out.
you've decided you're ready to have sex for the first time. What happens now?
Mm-mm.
No worries. I got you covered. The first thing to do is to talk with your partner about it. Tell them what you want, ask them what they want, and make sure you're on the same page. That's called consent, and it's sexy as hell. So let's start with the reality check. You know those hot, steamy sex scenes from your favorite TV shows? Yeah, your first time probably won't be anything like that, or like porn either. Honestly, it might be a little awkward. Maybe you'll laugh, cry, or even fart. And all of that is a-okay. It can help to lean into the silliness and sweetness of our bodies and relationships and try to have fun with any awkward stuff that comes up together. This is why it's important to talk with your partner beforehand so you both feel comfortable. Depending on what you've heard, watched, or read, you might wonder whether sex will hurt. First, remember that sex can mean a lot of different things. Anal, oral, fingering, using sex toys, vaginal. But what's important is that you get to decide what having sex for the first time means for you. If you have vaginal or anal sex for the first time, it may be uncomfortable or feel good, or both. Some people have a little pain and are bleeding when a penis, fingers, or sex toys go into a vagina or
this
anus.
is for like
But it doesn't
13-year-olds.
happen to everyone.
So much.
Oral
Oh,
sex doesn't
okay,
generally
stop
hurt.
playing, please.
So you've
Oh,
decided
goodness.
you're ready
How do
to
I
have
make
sex
it
for the
stop?
first time.
Sorry, you guys. Okay.
And this is inclusive education.
Yeah.
Yes,
This is
that's what
designed
it
for
is.
kids.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Even the
wanna
way that she talks and the rhythm
Yeah.
of her voice is geared
It's-
towards young people.
Yeah,
It
Hey
is.
guys, how's it going? Oh yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
I
whoa.
want to see
So
this
you
one.
think
It's
you're
like
ready
fifth
to have
grade.
sex. Well, let's take a step back, because I don't just want you to think you are ready. I want you to know you are ready. It should be
Not
entirely
your business.
your decision.
Mhm.
And that's the first question you should ask yourself. Is the decision to have sex coming from me or from someone else? Pressure should never be the reason you have sex. Sex should be consensual, period. Consent is when both people
Okay.
agree to
I
sex
just,
without
you know, I don't
Yeah.
hate that message. There's a lot about that to like, but I have such a hard time with this person.
The woman. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, it's really interesting, this how strange to think that a couple of teenagers are going to sit down and have some kind of a committee, like writing party, like we're going to write out what we want, and like they're going to get together in this way and
exactly.
have this big
Exactly.
discussion. Wow.
So I had a parent share with me that the drama teacher at their school had an activity where they were supposed to do a murder mystery, and the kids decided on this murder mystery that they were all going to be Broadway characters. That's fine, whatever. But the link was that they all had slept with the one person. So these are 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, and they're writing. And one of the characters was Dora, who's like, what, 8 years old? So they were writing their hot, steamy sexual stories for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. Then when one kid said he didn't feel comfortable about it and his mom went to the principal, he went through a struggle session in the group.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So normalizing this stuff and pretending that it's just they need to be protected. And like, I'm sorry, but it is always harmful for underage people to have sex.
Mhm.
Even if they think that it's fun, there's something, it's taking away from something, I think, for when they're too young. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying, I'm not saying a 17-year-old, like, people make their choices, but I'm talking about this stuff is geared towards middle school.
Yeah,
Which-
that's something that Ginger Blaze asks in the chat. What age are these made for? And I don't see any explicit statement about age, but it does look like an elementary school classroom, and she is trying to speak to people who are pre-sexual. So I would assume she's talking to preteens. And
6th, 7th, 8th grade.
Yeah, that seems about right. And some of the topics that are being introduced, like they just talk so casually about things like sex toys, anal sex, fingering, and
Yeah.
porn. She just offhandedly talks about these things. Like, you might have just introduced an idea to somebody who hadn't gotten there yet, hadn't had that thought. And it's coming from a really strange spokesperson. Matt Von Wald says, "I like the woman. She makes me never want to have sex again." But she's certainly an odd person to be. And there's like this really take charge tone where she's like, "I want you to be really, now stop right there. You think you're ready, but I want you to be really ready."
Yeah.
And so there's something really, I don't know how I would have felt being a kid and having a teacher like that, or having that shown, like rolled into a classroom and shown. I would have been.
I'm also annoyed that the person's Black, quite frankly.
Yeah, why is that?
Like, why is it always the people who are bringing in the ideas that people are going to have a huge issue with?
Well, she has all the identities. I mean, she's Black, she's female.
Yeah.
She looks kind of queer, maybe.
Yes.
And she's overweight. So she's got all of these intersectional things.
But if you're a parent and you're opposed to it, I think there's something in that just probably subconsciously in your mind is going to go, oh, here we go. Kind of like those people, which makes me really sad, because most people that I know who are of color would be horrified at the idea of their kids watching that in a classroom.
Because most, as you said before,
That's true.
tend to lean conservative. That's that's the main.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Good point. Interesting.
Yeah.
But if you want to other people, keep putting examples like that out.
Yeah.
I see that so much, and that is a very exhausting place to be in, to constantly have to be the opposite narrative of that all the time. And I hate to use the word exhausting, because that's a word that activists use. We are exhausted from doing the work, but it's like you've made the work. You guys
Yes.
did this.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. Well, interesting. Thanks for going on that exploration. And thank you to my friend who sent me the first link that sort of inspired this conversation. I didn't know this would be what we focused on the whole time, but
Yes.
there's so much more to say. It's really strange. I think it comes down to this, like, if there's this kind of deep hypocrisy in this, whatever this thing is that's presenting itself as liberalism. First of all, that's hypocritical. But
Yes.
second of all, this idea that in the name of tolerating everything, you don't tolerate a lot of things and you push certain things. In the name of neutrality and being open and being inclusive, you end up becoming pushing something that is very exclusive and very exclusionary, and therapy being not about the professions or the cultures or the therapist's values, but about the client's values. That did make sense to me when we were all knit together in a certain way, that there was a certain platform that we were all standing on, I guess, or it felt that way. I'm trying to articulate this. I'm trying to understand this, but now that we took that away, you can't push any values, but so we're going to push this perfectly benign thing that has it in the guise of not having values. It is values,
Right.
and it is something.
Right.
It's not nothing. I hope maybe
nothing.
someday I'll be able to articulate this better. Somebody can tell me
It's
how to talk
tricky
about
because
this.
it's tricky because I don't think that therapists should be pushing their values on people, but the issue isn't that they're pushing, they're not accepting of the other person's values. They are retraining people. Like I said before, they're transforming people in their sessions. So someone can come in and say, this is my issue, and it has nothing to do with queer ideology. But now we're supposed to explore queer ideology in here.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, they're supposed to be advocates and activists. And so that is for something. That is for something.
It is.
Yes.
It's why I liked working with substance abuse. I'll tell you, that was one of my favorite groups to work with, because this was not about appeasing the person that's in front of you as your client. This wasn't about affirming their behavior, which some of it was clearly vile. This was about, you need to take responsibility for you, for what you've done to yourself, for what you've done to your family, for what you've continued to do to harm others. And I'm not going to sit here and affirm all of that nasty behavior just because you had a poor upbringing. We're not going to sit here and play this game and you're an adult. It was direct. And I have had some of the most difficult clients and just people that were absolutely impossible. A couple of people that hated me and wanted to have a different therapist. And a couple of those very same people came back and wrote me some of the most beautiful letters I had ever received as a therapist, thanking me for making them take responsibility and learn to accept the word no, and learn that just because they think and feel this way does not mean anybody else has to accept it. And that helped them function in a more healthy way in the world around them and not manipulate in the same fashion to get needs met. And look at what those needs are and how you get those met without manipulation, but with actually using the tools that you learn about how to be an adult, how to be a grown-up. And that was incredible to me. Those were some of the best, moments in my career where I felt like something I did meant something. But that's why I liked working with that population, because it is very much not about that. It's very much about taking ownership, and you need to grow up. And that means you need to accept no. And just because you think it's okay, it doesn't mean the world has to accept that.
Right.
Very well
with the best practices.
Yes.
Well, it's always lovely to see you too.
You too. Yeah.
I look forward to the next one.
Always.
Thank you so much for the super chat, Matt Von Wald. Thank you. That's really nice.
Yes.
And have a great week, everybody.
You too. Yes.
You too.